no longer considered the funds of the company, so that if it goes bankrupt, for example, those funds cannot be touched by the receiver. And therefore, the government then has access to those funds to complete the rehabilitation works which need to be done. If the company is still healthy at the end of the mine, and it then commences the mine closure process, it draws down on those funds and completes the closure.
This trust fund is run by whom?
It is actually a joint public-private partnership between the company and the government.
And the country with so many mines like Mongolia can have a big trust fund in that sense?
Well, each one of them has its own because it actually has tax implications. When you place the money into the trust fund, it is deductible for taxes if it's an expense. So each company has to have its own accounts, if you like. But ultimately, you could have many of them, and those trust funds are in fact a protection for the people of Mongolia against mine sites just being abandoned and left in a mess.
See, we have a mess. We have hundreds of rivers have disappeared as a result of different mining. And nobody is taking responsibility, just big noises and nothing. Provided if we have this trust fund, do you think, do we have this fund in Mongolia?
You don't have anything like this at this point in time.
Why? It
is an element which I think is being considered at the moment in the review of the minerals law. In the past, it hasn't been a focus of attention. Now it is becoming a focus of attention. So I'm very hopeful that we will get this addressed.
You know, there is a place called the Zamar. It's a gold place. It's like now at the surface of moon.
I have been to Zamar, yes.
Would you agree?
There are parts of it that are like that, yes.
Terrible.
But there are other parts that have been rehabilitated. It just depends on the company and their ethics and how well the government is enforcing the regulations which currently exist. I think the regulations that currently exist still need to be further developed and strengthened, but I think also the capacity of the government to monitor the mining industry needs to be significantly strengthened.
So what happened when the river disappears as a result of gold digging in some places, washing gold, down the stream somewhere 10-20 kilometers, there is no river anymore. Life is stopped there. So what can we do?
Well, certainly, you know, there has been impacts on rivers from alluvial mining, but there is, at the same time, we're also experiencing the impacts of climate change in Mongolia. So not all of it can be attributed to the mining industry, because at the end of the day, if water is flowing into an area, it doesn't just disappear, right? It still must also flow out after it's been used in that mining area. So I think what we are seeing is more an impact from climate change than the mining industry. But certainly there are impacts. When I see the way that mining, particularly the alluvial miners here, operate compared to how they do in New Zealand, for example, which have very stringent regulations. You know, in New Zealand, the water that returns back into the river is quite clean, and the way it is managed through a series of settling ponds to make sure that all of the silt drops out before the water returns to the stream, make sure that the fish and other biodiversity is not impacted.
That's what I mean. The river is staying there. At the end, the river still flows.
But it's dirty in Mongolia. It's clean in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And that is because of the inadequacy of both the regulations and I guess the capacity to monitor effectively these operations. Now, whenever we talk about increasing capacity, it's a combination of things. It's a combination. You need money to increase your capacity. Sometimes it means more staff, sometimes it means better equipment, and very often it means funding just to enable people to get to the mine sites to monitor what is going on.
So that's a role of also local community is also monitoring of the site, the way how the cleaning is happening.
That's correct. This is an area, I think, where there's a lot of potential for work here in Mongolia and to help improve the outcomes by having what we call citizen monitoring, community groups overseeing the project and providing feedback to the regulators, and if there are problems, then the regulator can target where they will go, rather than try to go everywhere.
So isn't it a good solution for Mongolia to have local people doing this monitoring and getting paid?
I think it is a good option. I think it is something that should be explored more into the future. Either, having people who are working with the SUM and IMAG level government, or directly with the regulatory authority at the national level. I think there are definitely opportunities for perhaps lower cost monitoring because of people working in their own home environment and without the transportation cost of getting backwards and forwards.
So then let's consider this in the context of tax, how much the local community should take from the benefit of this mine. Usually in the bigger mines, the central power is getting more and less community less. In some cases, companies are becoming de facto governor of the place. What do you think about this tax?
Well, I think that there is, again, we are still in a very young environment when it comes to the decentralization of fiscal powers, or decentralization of budgeting and funds. I hope that as Mongolia progresses, that more and more of these functions for monitoring and for certainly the expenditure and use of funds goes back to the local levels. But this is going to require the growth of capacity and transparency and good governance at these local levels to be able to handle flows of funds. But at the moment, I would have to say that Mongolia doesn't have a very good structured system of decentralizing flows of money. At the moment, from these big operations, everything almost comes to the central government. It then relies on the central government to send money back out.
Not necessarily back to that place.
But it's not necessarily happening, and it's not necessarily going back to the places which are most impacted. And I think this is something that requires quite a lot of work here. If we take a look, for example, at the South Gobi area at the moment, and particularly the area around Oyu Tolgoi, we are seeing in-migration, people moving to the area and settling at Hanbog Sum, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Hanbog hasn't received any increase in budget, but it's got a big increase in people. So the schools are stretched, the health centres are stretched, the infrastructure, water supply, the electricity system, everything is stretched. And yet none of the budget, none of the money is flowing back to give the local authority the capacity to deal with the challenges it is facing. So there needs to be much more recognition that those areas with large mining operations are going to have more demands or experience more demands than other areas. So they should have additional budgets as a result.
So when this balance does not happen, when the local community do not receive, then it is replaced today by the so-called sponsorship by that mining company for a particular project.
That's correct.
As a result, we don't know where and what happens. When Borra Gold is giving some school or hospital, so for example, the maternity house number 1 will be rebuilt by Borra Gold money.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the best practice? Is it not tax?
Well, the thing is that a mining company sees its job as being a mining company, right?
Yes.
It wants to focus its attention on being the most efficient and profitable miner and digging the gold out of the ground or copper out of the ground. And